I am the Swarm. Author, Quantum Wizard. Chapter 101, Predation. According to the information Luo Wen initially received through the brood nest, this talent should have been innate from his hatching. However, this mysterious planet lacked a specific type of energy required for Luo Wen's abilities to manifest, leaving them dormant since his birth here. Later, through the connection to the brood nest and the self-sacrifice of countless bugs, a unique energy derived from life and soul replaced the original required energy, successfully activating Luo Wen's talent. Yet, due to the environmental and energy differences, this talent underwent unknown changes. It became unique, completely different from that of any other Efi-ish. At present, Luo Wen only knew that there was now a peculiar energy in his mind. While intangible, he could clearly sense its presence, a phenomenon that defied all logic. This revelation was a blow to Luo Wen, who had been raised with a firm belief in science and materialism. But then he thought about how he had been transformed into an insect by a green-haired old pervert. Compared to that, a strange energy in his brain seemed almost mundane. Still, the one-of-a-kind nature of this energy meant that discovering how to use it required constant trial and error. For now, what Luo Wen needed most was sleep. His consciousness gradually sank into darkness as a layer of cocoon enveloped him. When he woke up, Luo Wen let out a relieved sigh. This place wasn't completely safe, but luckily, no mishaps had occurred. His claws had regrown, and their once soft exoskeleton quickly hardened as he emerged from the cocoon. Luo Wen tested them briefly. They were as agile as before and fully functional. He was no stranger to regrowing claws. During his experiments with the hyperbolic system, losing claws had been a regular occurrence. However, losing both at once was a first. Glancing at his carapace, Luo Wen carefully sensed it. After a moment, he concluded that this cocooning hadn't granted him wings. He had anticipated this. The energy supply before cocooning had been insufficient. While he appeared full, most of it had been nutrient-poor water. Growing back both claws had already exceeded expectations. The hunger pangs and overall weakness he felt reminded him that this extraordinary regeneration came at a cost. While his exoskeleton concealed it, removing the armor would reveal severely atrophied and emaciated muscles. His top priority was finding food, preferably a hearty, all-meat feast. Meat-based energy conversion far outstripped that of tree sap. Carefully sensing his surroundings, Luo Wen detected nothing unusual. Even the vibrations from afar had ceased. Cautiously crawling out of his leaf-covered burrow, he used his legs to clean off the grime sticking to his body. Such dirt could create imperfections in his optical camouflage system. His legs moved rapidly. Luo Wen's legs, with their numerous joints and reverse joint capabilities, were highly versatile, a talent he used frequently, particularly for cleaning. Activating his optical camouflage had become second nature to him in a short time. Previously, surrounded by other bugs, pheromones were the primary means of identifying friend from foe. Luo Wen had rarely needed to act personally by the time he gained this talent. Yet now, it proved to be far more useful than he had ever imagined. It reminded him of how, during the pheromone era, bugs were easily countered by spy bugs. This realization served as a warning he needed to develop multiple detection methods to avoid being too easily countered. Moving cautiously among the towering trees, Luo Wen proceeded carefully. Previously, he only needed to watch for enemies from the ground or underground, which his leg hair sensory system could detect from a distance. In the past, few enemies could sneak up on him thanks to these skills. Now, however, he also had to guard against attacks from the sky, elevating his enemy detection to three-dimensional levels. While his nearly omnidirectional vision was an advantage, it was similar to how untrained humans often overlooked peripheral stimuli. It would take him some time to fully adapt to information from above. Fortunately, this adjustment wouldn't take long. Since awakening, Luo Wen's ability to process information had increased significantly. It felt like upgrading a computer's CPU. Handling additional visual data barely taxed his mental capacity. Luo Wen walked lightly and slowly, carefully placing each step. He even kept his swimming legs raised, using only 6 ordinary legs to minimize noise. His camouflage only fooled visual senses, it didn't mask sound. To avoid alerting enemies or prey, he strove to remain silent. Occasionally, small bugs flitting through the forest vanished as if transported elsewhere, never to reappear. Strange calls echoed intermittently around him, most of which Luo Wen couldn't identify. Only one was familiar. It belonged to the small birds that had gathered in his stomach the previous day. Aside from these birds, Luo Wen noticed numerous other avian species perched on branches, preening their feathers. These birds, small in size and insectivorous, thrived in the dense forest. There were no pterosaurs here. Their larger size and superior flight capabilities allowed them to soar higher and farther. The dense forest canopy obstructed their vision, and the complex terrain of the undergrowth was unsuitable for their wings, which were prone to injury in such an environment and difficult to heal. Birds, on the other hand, didn't face these issues. Losing a few feathers didn't impair their flight, and feathers regenerated quickly. This forest was their domain. Here, only a select few creatures posed a threat to them, and Luo Wen was one of them. Although he couldn't yet fly, climbing trees was a trivial task for Luo Wen, who could move effortlessly even on cliff faces. A few singing, brightly feathered birds suddenly disappeared one by one, leaving behind only a handful of feathers to mark their fate. For Luo Wen, these small birds and insects were mere snacks. The energy gained from eating them was only marginally better than tree sap. Tree sap provided low energy but was a consistent source. Small birds and insects, though meat, were sparse and, when factoring in time spent hunting, barely outperformed tree sap in energy efficiency. Suddenly, Luo Wen's eyes narrowed. In the distance, a green stream flowed down from the canopy of a massive tree, trickling along the trunk before disappearing into the ground and beyond his sight. This familiar sight filled Luo Wen with both excitement and renewed confusion. Chapter 102, Digging a Base. The unfamiliar environment and strange creatures gradually convinced Luo Wen of the reality that he had traversed worlds once more. This time, however, he had crossed over along with his insectoid body. But who could have anticipated that at such a moment, a creature he recognized would appear? Beneath the leaves, with heads resembling buttocks, black exoskeletons, and a coordinated infantry armor patrol pattern, they were unmistakably the big-headed ants he was familiar with. What the hell is going on here? For a moment, Luo Wen felt as if his newly upgraded CPU was overheating. If he hadn't traversed worlds, it meant his hibernation period had been unimaginably long enough for the world outside to undergo seismic changes and for species to evolve. But if he had traversed, it would mean the genetic blueprint of the big-headed ants was so potent that an identical species had evolved elsewhere. Luo Wen's movie-trained mind ventured further, considering the possibility of alien experiments or the presence of unknown human interference. He also speculated, perhaps inspired by Lost World movies, about a hidden continent that harbored these extraordinary species, which later thrived and expanded to conquer other lands. The hypotheses and conjectures multiplied in his mind, turning his thoughts into a tangled mess. Shaking his head vigorously, Luo Wen forced himself to calm down. Perhaps this situation was advantageous for him. A diverse array of species implied a rich gene pool. As long as he had a little time to recover, Luo Wen was confident he could uncover the truth. He quietly approached the green stream, scouting for targets. The worker ants carrying leaves were not his prey. Only the ultra-giant soldier ants, those wandering at the edges of the group and crawling with small soldier ants, were worthy of becoming his feast. These creatures were pure protein. Just a few of them could fill Luo Wen's stomach. However, the small soldier ants crawling all over them posed an annoyance. If he couldn't clear them out quickly and became entangled, he'd be in trouble, especially now, being alone. Previously, ultra-giant soldier ants had some small soldier ants on them for protection, but never as many as now. Observing the small birds circling above the ants, Luo Wen made a guess. It was now an era of fully integrated, multidimensional combat. It made sense to bring extra aerial units as protection. Luo Wen had a certain area of effect skill perfect for this scenario. However, it reminded him of unpleasant memories. Yet, with the pressure and crisis he felt, he could no longer afford hesitation. Activating pheromone camouflage and optical invisibility simultaneously, Luo Wen stealthily approached. A patrolling ultra-giant soldier ant was suddenly engulfed by a cloud of white mist on its flank. Instantly, a barrage of liquid projectiles, infused with high temperatures and strong corrosiveness, sprayed toward it. The relentless assault inflicted severe damage immediately. Despite its injuries, the ultra-giant soldier ant's sheer size kept it from dying on the spot. Unfortunately for the small soldier ants riding on its back, they weren't so lucky. With Luo Wen's massive form unleashing such a concentrated attack, the high heat and strong acid quickly incapacitated and withered them. After one round of attacks, the air reeked of a foul stench. The lingering white mist was abruptly dispersed by a strong gust of wind, revealing a vibrant colored claw-like appendage. The claw clamped onto the ultra-giant soldier ant's body and, amid its fierce struggles, dragged it into the underbrush, disappearing from sight. The entire operation happened in the blink of an eye. Due to their limited reconnaissance capabilities, the big-headed ants' leaf harvesting team didn't even notice the attack. Soon after, several other patrolling ultra-giant soldier ants also vanished. Only then did the big-headed ants sense something was amiss. Unfortunately for them, by this time, the hunter had already retreated with his spoils. Luo Wen hadn't gone far. For one, there were too many prey to carry. Secondly, for a creature like the big-headed ants, with poor vision, cutting off their pheromone signals meant Luo Wen could stay within a meter of them and still avoid detection. Back in his days with the reconnaissance squad, they'd exploited this weakness of the big-headed ants to great advantage. Luo Wen was particularly skilled at it. After feasting, Luo Wen took advantage of the big-headed ants' relaxed defenses to hunt a few more ultra-giant soldier ants. Finally, he felt somewhat satiated. Following the green stream for over 100 meters, he caught sight of the big-headed ant's nest from afar. Not far from the nest, at a location with complex terrain, Luo Wen began digging. With his stomach full, it was time to construct a base. Building near the big-headed ant's nest was an excellent choice for establishing his territory. By deploying misleading pheromones in the area, Luo Wen could ensure the new base's security during its early stages. Though it had been a long time since Luo Wen last dug a burrow himself, his skills were far from rusty. Even though he now used his claw-like appendages for digging, his efficiency remained high. However, his large size made the excavation a considerable undertaking. With no other insects to assist him, Luo Wen could only dig a bit and then push the soil out of the burrow. This approach slowed progress significantly. As the burrow extended underground, the sky gradually darkened. When Luo Wen once again pushed soil out of the burrow, night had fully fallen. Threads of moonlight stubbornly filtered through the canopy, casting a serene, distant glow on the ground. Luo Wen lay at the entrance of the burrow, gazing at the moonlight in a daze. Suddenly, as if struck by an idea, he darted out and climbed a nearby tree at high speed. At the treetop, a black insect was lost in thought. "This is still the original planet," Luo Wen murmured. He suddenly realized how simple it was to verify. In the sky, two light sources hung high, one slightly yellowish-white and the other faintly red. They were unmistakably familiar. How long have I been asleep? Luo Wen fell into contemplation. Unexpectedly, his hibernation ability had such hidden risks. Thinking back, he was fortunate the noisy frog had woken him up earlier. Otherwise, who knew how much longer he would have slept? Though this hibernation skill was remarkably effective slowing his body's state to near stasis, it couldn't hide its glaring flaw. Now that Luo Wen was certain of his location and had dismissed those implausible theories, he felt much more at ease. With his sense of crisis significantly reduced, even digging lost its appeal. The late hour called for rest. Camouflaging the burrow entrance, Luo Wen burrowed into a pile of decaying leaves nearby and fell into a deep sleep. As for why he didn't sleep inside the burrow? A single passaged burrow without escape routes wasn't secure enough for Luo Wen's peace of mind. Chapter 103, Flight. The ultra-giant soldier ants were a marvel of biology, managing to achieve such massive sizes despite the severely outdated oxygen supply system typical of ant physiology. They relied entirely on their incredibly dense and powerful muscles to physically pump oxygen throughout their bodies. This impressive muscle density also translated into a highly efficient energy conversion rate. When Luo Wen awoke, not only had he grown wings, but his brood nest had also regenerated. Previously, Luo Wen had only speculated about the possibility of his brood nest regenerating. Now, with his hypothesis confirmed, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps due to insufficient energy supply during growth, the regenerated brood nest appeared somewhat underdeveloped. However, this was only in relation to Luo Wen's large size. Compared to its initial state when it was first formed, the reborn brood nest was already several times larger. Scooping up some rotting branches and leaves from the surroundings, Luo Wen stuffed them into the feeding orifice of the brood nest. Though this first meal for the regenerated brood nest was lackluster, the circumstances left little room for luxury. Something was better than nothing. The brood nest wasn't nearly as picky as Luo Wen. Ever since it acquired earthworm genes, it could even consume soil and pebbles, earning it the title of everything within sight is edible. Rotting leaves, therefore, were an effortless choice. After attending to the brood nest, Luo Wen crawled out of his burrow. If not for the importance of the brood nest, he would have been unable to suppress his excitement. Soaring freely through the blue sky was a dream cherished by all living creatures. Luo Wen, whether in his past human life or his current insect form, had always longed for a pair of wings of his own. Now, that dream had come true. The sturdy black carapace on his back split open and lifted upward, revealing a pair of delicate, transparent wings that unfolded. The intricate patterns on the wings were clearly visible, with black accents along their edges and roots. The wings began to vibrate, their speed increasing rapidly. Gradually, Luo Wen's cumbersome body lifted off the ground. Though his first flight was clumsy, rocking left and right with a constant risk of crashing, Luo Wen couldn't help but emit a hiss of exhilaration. Flying was a highly energy-intensive activity. For Luo Wen, using a pair of thin, translucent wings to lift his tens of kilograms heavy body required an immense amount of energy. Still recovering from hibernation and with his energy reserves critically low, Luo Wen was forced to land after less than half a minute of flight, having barely risen 20 centimeters off the ground. While Luo Wen felt a twinge of disappointment, he didn't complain. After all, his wings weren't rented, there was plenty of time to enjoy them once he'd eaten his fill. Meanwhile, the big-headed ants' leaf-cutting convoy, after enjoying 2 days of relative peace, suffered another ambush. Several ultra-giant soldier ants were lost to an unknown assailant during transportation. Infuriated, the big-headed ants dispatched a large force to sweep the area of the attack, but all they found were lingering stench and chaotic pheromone trails. The perpetrator had long since vanished. Replenished and brimming with energy, Luo Wen even brought 2 ants back to his brood nest to hasten its recovery. Once everything was in order, he eagerly began his second flight experiment. In the jungle, a large black beetle hovered half a meter above the ground, flying at a leisurely pace. Its mandibles and limbs dangled naturally as its wings beat so quickly that even their after-images blurred. Despite successfully flying, Luo Wen couldn't help feeling a bit disheartened. He could fly, sure, but it wasn't anything like what he'd envisioned. In his imagination, flight meant dazzling aerial maneuvers, breakneck speeds, and intense dogfights with opponents, reminiscent of the pterosaurs battling for food in the sky he'd once witnessed. But now, watching the scenery slowly recede around him, Luo Wen realized his flight speed was slower than his crawling speed on the ground. The gap between expectation and reality left him momentarily uninspired. At this speed, the only advantage he could think of was avoiding embarrassment during another free-fall situation like last time. However, his slow flight wasn't due to a lack of capability in his flying system. On the contrary, his wings incorporated several advanced technologies. First, Luo Wen had developed a set of muscles dedicated to wing movement. The protein fibers within these muscles were highly organized, with cross-sections forming a precise hexagonal pattern. This structural regularity allowed for rapid wing vibrations. Luo Wen's wings flapped at a standard rate of over 1,000 times per minute, with the maximum speed exceeding 20,000 flaps per minute. However, such high-speed flapping generated significant noise and consumed a massive amount of energy, though it did considerably increase flight speed. The wings themselves were membranous and featured hidden folding patterns. When in use, the elytra, wing covers, opened, and the concealed wings unfurled like umbrellas. Retracting the wings was a bit more complex. It required leveraging the elasticity and flexibility within the wings' internal structures to fold them back along their creases. In simpler terms, the wings needed to be folded back into place. Initially, Luo Wen struggled with this operation. After folding his wings and elytra, parts of the wings remained exposed. Assuming this was normal, he paid it little attention. Later, after observing green beetles, he realized the wings could be fully retracted. It required the assistance of his hind legs to manually push the wings back under the elytra, where they would automatically fold along their creases. Even with these features, the wings alone wouldn't have been sufficient to lift Luo Wen's heavy body. Here's where the most advanced feature came into play. The elytra housed an enormous amount of ultramicroscopic pyramid structures. When the wings vibrated at high speed, these structures emitted magnetic particle longitudinal waves. The directional waves created a polarized magnetic particle phenomenon, which in turn generated an anti-gravity field effect. Simply put, it was anti-gravity. The elytra's unique structure allowed Luo Wen to partially negate gravity, enabling his lightweight wings to lift his bulky body into the air. However, this system wasn't omnipotent. Otherwise, Luo Wen wouldn't have been so dissatisfied with his flight speed. Improving his speed was straightforward in theory: permanently alter his body structure, shedding parts of his exoskeleton and protective layers to reduce weight. Reshaping his rotund body into an aerodynamic form would also enhance his speed. Such modifications were entirely possible with his newfound ability to choose genetic segments to transform himself, a talent awakened after his prolonged hibernation. With sufficient energy, a single session of cocooned metamorphosis could achieve these changes. Yet after careful consideration, Luo Wen decided against it for now. The jungle terrain was treacherous, and his delicate membranous wings couldn't withstand much abuse. Above the treetops, the domain of the pterosaurs, Luo Wen was utterly outclassed in both size and numbers. All things considered, faster flight offered little advantage in his current situation. Thus, when forced to choose between speed and defense, he opted for defense. Chapter 104, The Long-Faced Beast. The novelty of having wings soon wore off, and Luo Wen's initial excitement cooled as rationality reclaimed its position. His plans for soaring the skies were temporarily shelved. The top priority now was nurturing the brood nest and rebuilding the structure of the swarm. Over the next few days, nothing noteworthy occurred except for the daily loss of varying numbers of ultra-giant soldier ants from the big-headed ants. The underground temporary base was completed yesterday. In addition to personal chambers for Luo Wen and the brood nest, it also included facilities like a hatchery and storage rooms, along with as many as 5 escape tunnels. After several days of recovery, the brood nest had also largely regained its functionality. Luo Wen immediately issued a production order for the first batch, 50 fully grown worker ants. This method of production consumed a tremendous amount of energy. Fortunately, worker ants were relatively small compared to the current size of the brood nest, so there was no repeat of the situation from before when the queen ant produced Big Black and became debilitated for over a week. Within half a day, 50 worker ants were ready. Next, Luo Wen issued a daily order for 10,000 eggs, which would eventually hatch into worker ants, burrower ants, and spy bugs. There was no need to produce combat units at this stage of the swarm's development, current resources simply couldn't support them. For now, the focus was on replenishing labor and steadily growing. The base gradually came into operation. Luo Wen personally handled the hunting tasks outside. With the nearby granary available, the risks were minimal. The base saw an increase of 10,000 eggs daily, and as they began hatching, the 50 worker ants struggled to manage them. The brood nest paused egg production to prioritize a week of producing adult worker ants. The addition of hundreds of worker ants, though insufficient to meet the needs of the hatchery, provided some relief for now. Thanks to several rounds of genetic optimization, the worker ants' growth speed was significantly faster. If this pace could be maintained for a dozen more days, the first batch of insect pupae would hatch, alleviating the labor shortage. In the meantime, the larvae were fed less frequently, but a little hunger wouldn't harm them. It was manageable. On this day, as Luo Wen emerged from his burrow to hunt, he noticed faint tremors from the ground. Unlike the distant earth-shaking vibrations from earlier days, these were lighter, indicating the source was smaller in size and relatively close. The dense jungle vegetation obstructed visibility, making it difficult to see far. Luo Wen cautiously activated optical camouflage and climbed a nearby tree trunk to gain a height advantage for observing the source of the disturbance. However, the view from above was also limited. Unfurling his membranous wings from beneath the elytra, Luo Wen pushed off the tree trunk with his legs while spreading his wings. By flapping lightly, he glided silently to another nearby trunk. This wasn't true flight but a quiet gliding technique Luo Wen had recently discovered. While daydreaming in the treetops, he observed a creature far off in a taller tree. It had wing-like membranes under its arms, and despite its small size, it leapt from a height, spread its limbs, and glided out of sight. From a distance, it seemed like some type of frog or lizard. Inspired, Luo Wen practiced this method repeatedly. Though his equipment was far from specialized, his membranous wings could suffice in a pinch. Because of his weight, his gliding range was short, only effective for traveling between nearby trunks with the aid of jumps. While limited, this method provided a safe way to navigate situations like the current one. After gliding around 20 meters, Luo Wen was surprised to discover that the unknown creature was heading straight for his position. Remaining motionless, he soon got a clear look at the intruder. It was a creature resembling a dog, but with an unusually elongated head that gave it a sinister appearance. Standing over a meter tall and nearly 3 meters long including its tail, it had short, sturdy limbs ending in 3-toed, muscular paws. Its body was covered in coarse, grayish-brown bristle-like fur without any exoskeleton armor. The long-faced beast approached the tree beneath Luo Wen, sniffing the ground with its elongated snout, seemingly searching for something. Carefully tracking it from tree to tree, Luo Wen observed the beast's behavior. Its larger size and unknown abilities made it unwise to act recklessly. The long-faced beast gradually closed in on the big-headed ant's leaf-cutting convoy. It seemed to identify its target and joyfully bounded toward the ants. As it neared, a half-meter-long, agile tongue shot out from its mouth. The tongue struck a medium soldier ant, rolled it up in sticky saliva, and pulled it into the beast's mouth. After chewing a few times, the ant disappeared into its stomach. Luo Wen was taken aback. Who would have thought this dog-like creature had mastered the skills of a frog? Then, Luo Wen felt a surge of irritation. The big-headed ant's nest near his base was already considered his personal granary. This beast was stealing food right under his nose. Clearly an experienced predator of big-headed ants, the long-faced beast maintained an optimal distance, using its tongue to snatch one worker ant or soldier ant after another. Despite their once dominant position, the big-headed ants were oblivious to the attacks. Their vulnerabilities were glaring and easy to exploit. After observing for a while, Luo Wen deduced that the long-faced beast had no other notable skills beyond its tongue. This made sense. If it were more capable, it wouldn't be stuck preying on ants. Moreover, the beast avoided giant soldier ants and ultra-giant soldier ants entirely, keeping a safe distance from them. Luo Wen formulated his plan. A creature with such weak combat capabilities dared to steal his food? While the long-faced beast was enjoying its meal, it suddenly felt a heavy weight on its back, nearly forcing it to the ground. As it struggled, a sharp pain shot through the back of its neck, followed by the weight lifting abruptly. Luo Wen had made his move. The beast's eyes, located on the sides of its head, left its upper side a blind spot. Using gliding and optical camouflage, Luo Wen landed silently on its back. Before the beast could react, Luo Wen's venomous fangs pierced its neck. Beneath its bristly fur, its relatively tough skin offered little defense compared to exoskeleton armor, allowing the fangs to penetrate easily. After injecting venom, Luo Wen swiftly retreated to a nearby tree trunk. Death was now inevitable for the poisoned beast, and Luo Wen saw no need for further confrontation. He would simply wait and let time do the work. Chapter 105, The Swarm Network Awakens. The pain of muscles being gradually dissolved drove the long-faced beast into madness. It could no longer hide and began fleeing in all directions. Unfortunately, the danger stemmed from within its body. Its frantic escape not only failed to alleviate the situation but hastened the venom's spread. In mere moments, though its bones still fiercely resisted the venom's invasion, a large portion of its muscles had already dissolved, leaving it unable to support its heavy body. The long-faced beast staggered forward a few more steps before collapsing with a thunderous crash, flattening a patch of wild grass. Lying on the ground, the long-faced beast convulsed continuously for over 10 minutes before finally falling still. After waiting for a while longer, Luo Wen leapt down from the tree trunk and cautiously approached his prey. Seeing the lifeless and vacant eyes of the long-faced beast, he knew it was truly dead. In truth, although the venom Luo Wen injected was highly toxic, given the size of the long-faced beast, it could only dissolve about half its muscle tissue. However, Luo Wen had chosen his target well. The area around the back of the neck was dense with central nerves, serving as the sole connection between the brain and the body. With the muscles and nerve tissue in this area destroyed, even if the beast were alive, it would lose its ability to move and become an easy target. After confirming that the prey was no longer a threat, Luo Wen stepped forward and began consuming the dissolved meat juices to fill his stomach. But soon, he found himself at a bit of a loss. The long-faced beast measured 3 meters in length. Although its elongated head and tail accounted for much of its length, its main body was still about 2 meters, with 4 stout legs adding significant bulk. Even after Luo Wen consumed a portion, more than 200 kilograms of meat remained. In the past, such a quantity of food would have been quickly processed by the swarm. But now, digestion was no longer the issue. Even storage posed a challenge. The commotion caused by the long-faced beast's frenzy had already alerted the big-headed ants. Some scouts were already following the trail to investigate. This place was no longer safe, so Luo Wen decided to retreat first. He scattered some pheromones around to create confusion, then hoisted the long-faced beast onto his back and left swiftly. Although the long-faced beast's size and weight dwarfed Luo Wen's own, his exoskeletal armor made moving this load manageable. After all, ants with similar exoskeletons could carry hundreds of times their body weight. When Luo Wen was about a dozen meters away from the base, he stopped. The entrance to the cave was too narrow to accommodate the entire long-faced beast in its current state. Widening it would take time, but cutting the beast into smaller pieces would release a significant amount of blood scent. In this primeval jungle, the smell of blood was akin to an invitation to a feast, and the locals were far from civilized, often displaying extreme savagery in food fights. Yet abandoning such a hard-earned meal was out of the question for Luo Wen. After thinking for a long time, Luo Wen finally came up with a decent plan, though its execution felt a bit undignified. He first found a spot downwind near the base. Dragging the long-faced beast there, he buried it under soil and decaying leaves. Finally, he raised his abdomen and launched a Gatling-style barrage, spraying projectiles in all directions. The primary purpose of this attack was not its highly corrosive and high-temperature effects but its secondary property. An unbearable stench spread, masking the scent of the long-faced beast's wounds and effectively repelling other predators. Moreover, the odor had a shelf life of over half a month. Luo Wen could easily finish consuming the beast in far less time. After satisfying his hunger, Luo Wen hunted 2 ultra-giant soldier ants and ended his day's hunt early, returning to the base. He divided the ultra-giants between the brood nest, worker ants and larvae, then lay down on one side, bored, watching the bustling hatchery. As he stared absent-mindedly at a worker ant, the mysterious energy mass in his mind suddenly became active. Immediately, Luo Wen's perspective shifted as if his soul had traversed dimensions. Before his eyes appeared a hungry larva with its mouth wide open, waiting to be fed. The sudden change startled him, breaking the connection and returning his consciousness to his body, restoring his normal vision. He realized he had been watching a worker ant feeding that very larva, a larva that now seemed oddly familiar. Luo Wen shivered as if a switch had been flipped. A talent was awakened, and in an instant, he understood everything. The mysterious purple-white energy in his mind boiled and churned. Each insect in the hatchery lit up like a node in his consciousness, forming an unseen network that linked them all together as one. With a single thought, Luo Wen activated a node, and his perspective instantly shifted without any delay. A set of menacing mandibles, dripping with saliva and food mixture, loomed large in his vision. Startled, Luo Wen disconnected from the node and switched to another, a worker ant transporting eggs. His consciousness descending had no effect on its actions, it continued working. With another thought, Luo Wen increased the energy output, causing the worker ant to freeze momentarily. It seemed to become self-aware, performing strange actions like raising its limbs and even putting down the egg to crawl around the hatchery in circles. Gradually, other insects in the hatchery began exhibiting strange behaviors. At first, it was 1 or 2, eventually, it escalated into a collective phenomenon. Luo Wen was exhilarated. Was this the legendary swarm instant communication system? When the swarm's territory expanded, Luo Wen had constantly struggled with communication issues but could never find a good solution. Finally, after the swarm reached a certain scale, linking with the brood nest had provided him with some vague information, a potential breakthrough for solving communication problems. After extensive development, the swarm met the necessary criteria, leading to the grand sacrifice of countless insects and a long slumber that followed. Upon awakening, Luo Wen found the mysterious energy in his mind but had yet to unlock its true purpose until now. The immense joy Luo Wen felt after testing the system was indescribable. He had never imagined that this breakthrough would result in such an advanced communication system. No wonder it required such intricate procedures and prolonged preparation. From his tests, Luo Wen mastered some functionalities of the system. He could transfer his consciousness into any insect, seamlessly switch perspectives, and even take control of their bodies with enhanced energy output. The control was precise, without any lag. With increased energy output, he could command entire regions of insects simultaneously. However, as he had not yet mastered multitasking, controlling numerous insects individually for complex tasks remained impractical. For now, this feature was somewhat underutilized. Chapter 106, Under the Swarm Network. In truth, opportunities to use this feature were practically non-existent. During subsequent tests, Luo Wen discovered that when his consciousness descended upon a particular insect, he could emit a special kind of wave through its body. Insects receiving this wave would naturally follow his commands, eliminating the need to take direct control of their bodies. This meant that in future wars, Luo Wen wouldn't need to personally step onto the battlefield. He could remain safely in the rear and conduct remote operations. However, Luo Wen also identified a flaw in the system: the insects lacked names and were displayed as mere nodes within his mental space. Currently, with the insect population still sparse, this wasn't a major issue. But if the swarm ever regained its former scale of trillions, imagine the chaos of so many nodes flooding his mind. Distinguishing them would become an enormous challenge. After repeated experimentation, Luo Wen devised a temporary solution to this flaw. He could group these nodes in his mind and recreate a sandbox map based on the real-world terrain. The insects would then be arranged and organized according to their actual positions. Moreover, Luo Wen found that he didn't always need to click on nodes in his mind to switch perspectives. He could now seamlessly leap between insects within his line of sight. For instance, if he had possessed this system earlier and wanted to contact the Northern Army, he could first descend upon any insect in their ranks, then leap between countless others until he found the desired perspective or insect. Although somewhat cumbersome, this method solved the problem, considering the transitions were instantaneous. Additionally, since this was an instant communication system, it should have some interactive features. Luo Wen believed the insects should be able to call him actively, rather than him descending upon them unilaterally. However, the swarm had only recently begun to recover, and the current insects were mostly low-intelligence workers, incapable of such complex operations. Testing whether this function existed would have to wait for the emergence of a Type I queen ant. The system was incredibly powerful and had even evolved additional features over time, far surpassing the scope of a mere instant communication system. Luo Wen named it the Swarm Network, signifying an invisible web linking the entire swarm together. While the swarm network didn't directly enhance the swarm's numbers, a critical form of strength, it invisibly boosted their overall capabilities, raising the swarm's competitive edge by several levels. What other functions it possessed remained unknown due to the current limitations. Only through continuous development could they be uncovered. But even its currently displayed capabilities elevated Luo Wen's vision to new heights. Perhaps the swarm's future was boundless. Over the next few days, Luo Wen spent his time bringing back a few ultra-giant soldier ants to the nest daily and using venom to dissolve parts of long-faced beasts to treat himself to private meals. He also ambushed passing birds and insects to satisfy his cravings. 10 or so days later, the chirping of insects and birds around him noticeably dwindled. The area had become a forbidden zone for them. Meanwhile, the long-faced beasts had been completely consumed. Fortunately, during this time, the first batches of insects had begun to emerge from their cocoons. Under Luo Wen's orders, the burrower ants dug tunnels while the spy bugs provided cover. Within half a day, they had completed a tunnel connecting to the big-headed ant nest's lower levels. This rapid completion was due to two factors. Luo Wen had originally chosen a base location close to the big-headed ant nest. The second reason was the swarm network, which allowed him to command the troops in real time, even directly taking control of certain insects for precise operations. Since Luo Wen's body had grown larger, he no longer personally supervised the digging. The burrower ants, with their limited intelligence, often failed to fully understand his instructions, leading to imperfect results. The arrival of the queen ant improved the situation somewhat, but it still fell short of Luo Wen's standards. Now, with the swarm network's help, Luo Wen returned to the front lines of excavation, personally guiding the work. The resulting tunnels felt significantly smoother. Once the tunnel connecting to the big-headed ant nest was completed, the burrower ants withdrew, and swarms of spy bugs moved in. Approximately 10,000 spy bugs were divided into several small teams, infiltrating the big-headed ant nest in sequence. During the excavation, Luo Wen noticed that while these basic units weren't very intelligent, they had strong learning and imitation abilities. Many tasks only required him to demonstrate once for them to replicate with impressive accuracy. This infiltration operation was somewhat complex. After entering the big-headed ant nest, the spy bugs needed to create localized numerical advantages and steadily devour the big-headed ant's living forces. If it were just about stealing food or targeting a specific objective, such simple commands could be executed well. But they likely couldn't grasp the concept of creating localized numerical superiority. Fortunately, Luo Wen could now provide live demonstrations. Inside the nest, the familiar spiral structures greeted him, with plantations dotting the tunnels. After sealing off the entrance with misleading pheromones to temporarily obscure their presence, the spy bugs approached their targets under Luo Wen's command. These specialists in infiltration and assassination were particularly devious poison insects. Given their numerical advantage, eliminating the unguarded worker ants felt almost overkill. As Luo Wen had expected, the spy bugs completed the task flawlessly, with 0 casualties. After eliminating the worker ants in the room, some worker ants from the swarm were escorted in by the spy bugs to take over the plantation. The enemy worker ants' corpses and the matured fungal crops were transported back to the swarm's base for daily needs. Starting from remote plantation rooms, the swarm steadily devoured the big-headed ant's underground territory. The big-headed ant nest had never encountered such tactics and was woefully unprepared in defense. Occasionally, passing worker or soldier ants might brush against spy bugs, exchanging pheromones in a friendly manner. But if they wandered into the occupied plantations out of curiosity, they would swiftly become lifeless resources transported back to the swarm base. If this scenario were filmed as a human movie, it would resemble an underground base where colleagues were continuously replaced by unknown entities, all while the base remained oblivious. A chilling thought. Chapter 107, Flying Insects. After observing for 2 days to ensure the insects were thoroughly familiar with their tasks, Luo Wen finally freed himself from the duties of hunting food and feeding larvae. By occupying existing plantations and eliminating big-headed ants, the swarm base could now meet its daily needs. Luo Wen only needed to feed himself. The long-faced beasts had been consumed, and the ultra-giant soldier ants of the big-headed ants had nearly been hunted to extinction after days of relentless attacks. As for other big-headed ant soldiers, their smaller size made them unsatisfying to eat, so Luo Wen left them to the swarm to slowly consume and digest. Luo Wen decided to explore the nearby area, hoping to find another long-faced beast. That would resolve his food supply for many days. At first, he didn't dare venture too far from the base, worried that the insects might slip up and attract the big-headed ants to retaliate against the base. He frequently used the swarm network to monitor the situation. Surprisingly, everything progressed smoothly. Every day, around 10,000 adult insects emerged from their cocoons, and the number of infiltrators inside the big-headed ant nest steadily increased. The swarm had even taken control of plantation rooms near the connecting tunnel, securing the passage and virtually eliminating the risk of exposure. With fewer concerns, Luo Wen expanded his exploration range over the next few days, eventually even staying out overnight. Although he didn't encounter another long-faced beast, his increasingly skilled hunting techniques and the abundance of small creatures in the jungle ensured he could still fill his stomach. About 2 or 3 kilometers northwest of the base, Luo Wen discovered a mountain hollow filled with unusual green-leafed vegetation. The trees, averaging over 30 meters tall, had thick trunks and bore numerous red-skinned, ping-pong ball-sized fruits. Small, peculiar creatures lived in the trees. These animals, 20 to 30 centimeters long, had round heads, large eyes, fur-covered bodies, short limbs, sharp claws, and slender tails tipped with short fur. The creatures fed on the red-skinned fruits and moved nimbly among the interconnecting branches beneath the canopy, rarely descending to the ground. Since the small birds sharing their ecological niche posed little threat, they faced few natural predators and existed in large numbers. Their low vigilance made them relatively easy prey. Despite their small size, these creatures were plump, with a fair amount of meat that tasted quite good. When Luo Wen first explored the area, it didn't take him long to eat his fill. After digesting for a while, he decided not to linger and marked the area heavily before leaving. He planned to return whenever he needed more food. In addition to these small creatures, Luo Wen discovered other interesting species, one of which particularly caught his attention. It was a flying insect resembling an ant but much larger, measuring around 6 to 7 centimeters in length. Its slender, streamlined body was yellow-brown with black circular markings. A pair of thin, transparent wings extended from its back, and its tail ended in a sharp, black stinger. The insect's head was flat and rounded, with a sleek, mechanical aesthetic. However, only its head was armored, with a small dorsal plate covering the muscles around its wing base. The rest of its body lacked exoskeletal protection. This was understandable, as these were specialized aerial combat units, fundamentally different from Luo Wen's improvised adaptations. Although they lacked exoskeletal protection, their flight speed was impressive. They moved in large swarms numbering in the thousands. When the yellow insects vibrated their wings en masse, the resulting buzzing sound was loud, reminiscent of old fighter planes. Luo Wen first encountered these flying insects while feasting in the red fruit forest. He had heard the sound from a distance and was puzzled, but the small creatures, apparently familiar with the noise, quickly hid in tree holes. What had been a lively forest moments ago was suddenly silent, save for the insects' deafening buzz. Realizing the situation, Luo Wen chose not to provoke trouble. He abandoned his meal, concealed himself among the treetops, and observed the swarm. The flying insects passed below like a squadron of fighter planes, undeterred by any other creatures. Their brazen display suggested either recklessness or genuine confidence, likely the latter. At the very least, their thunderous presence was intimidating. Luo Wen envied their flight capabilities. Unfortunately, his lack of prior knowledge left him too far to intercept any. The air fleet flew quickly, vanishing into the jungle before he could react. He wasn't overly disappointed, as their wings didn't seem suited for long-distance flight. Their nest was likely nearby, and he was determined to find them again. In another part of the jungle, Luo Wen stumbled upon a group of small green dinosaurs. He wasn't surprised, given his previous experience as a pterosaur food experience card. These dinosaurs, resembling velociraptors from movies, numbered over 10. They had long heads filled with uneven, sharp teeth likely indicating dental problems. Their large, watery eyes on the sides of their heads made them look quite alert. Their forelimbs were short and their hind limbs thick and powerful, each equipped with 3 curved, razor-sharp claws. They walked upright on 2 legs and had long, flexible tails that enhanced their agility and speed. Unlike velociraptors, these dinosaurs had colorful feathers running from their elbows to their armpits. While incapable of flight, these feathers helped them steer during high-speed sprints. In such moments, they resembled oversized chickens. Standing less than half a meter tall and measuring 1.5 meters in length, their green, white patterned skin appeared rough and lacked armor, suggesting poor defense. Luo Wen encountered them while they were chasing prey. Their commotion and duck-like calls drew his attention. Their loud, careless cries made it clear they weren't apex predators, certainly not as awe-inspiring as the air fleet of flying insects. Despite their speed, the jungle's complex terrain forced them to constantly navigate obstacles, wasting time. Their agility couldn't compare to the flying insects, who left Luo Wen far behind. Gliding between tree trunks, Luo Wen easily caught up with the small dinosaurs. Chapter 108, Aiding the Weak. Luo Wen managed to catch up with the small dinosaurs so quickly not only because the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line but also because the dinosaurs had stopped moving. From a distance, Luo Wen saw them crowding around the entrance of a burrow at the base of a small hill, shouting at the top of their lungs. It was as if they were trying to attract a more powerful predator, a level of recklessness that surpassed even Luo Wen's. The burrow, originally concealed by natural coverings, had been trampled into disrepair, leaving the entrance exposed. Although the opening wasn't large, the slender-bodied dinosaurs could probably force their way in with some effort. However, their physique wasn't suited for underground combat, and entering the burrow would likely lead to a grim fate. The dinosaurs, seemingly experienced, clearly understood this. Instead of attacking, they surrounded the burrow and used their incessant shouting to intimidate the creatures inside. Occasionally, they would tilt their heads and cock their ears, as if searching for something. Luo Wen, observing from above, couldn't see what kind of creature was hiding in the burrow. Judging by the fact that it dared not return home while the dinosaurs waited, it was likely weak and not worth much attention. The grating calls of the dinosaurs were giving Luo Wen a headache. Concerned about attracting other, stronger predators and eager to silence the commotion, Luo Wen decided to intervene. First, he circled the area to ensure no ambush predators were lying in wait to take advantage of the situation. Returning to the top of the hill, he sought a suitable target. Although Luo Wen lacked formal training in biology, his field experience had taught him some basic patterns. These swift, sharp-toothed dinosaurs were unlikely to be venomous. Despite their numbers, Luo Wen wasn't afraid of them, thanks to his armored body. Moreover, he had no intention of engaging them head-on. As a flying, venomous, stealth-capable assassin, ambush tactics suited him far better. The positioning of the dinosaurs' sensory organs meant they had to tilt their heads upward to see above. Having honed his skills in hiding and ambushing through countless hours of battle royale games, Luo Wen considered this an easy operation. Just as he locked onto his target and began gliding down, the nearby grass suddenly rustled, as if something had bolted from the undergrowth. The dinosaurs, only slightly slower to notice than Luo Wen, immediately reacted to the disturbance. While a few stayed behind to guard the burrow, the rest charged toward the moving grass. Curious about what had happened and interested in studying the dinosaurs' combat tactics just in case they turned out to be venomous, Luo Wen quietly adjusted his trajectory mid-flight. His silent wing beats allowed him to veer off course without alerting the guarding dinosaurs. From his new vantage point, Luo Wen saw multiple creatures emerging from the burrow, 5 mammals, to be exact. Cornered by the dinosaurs, the mammals bared their teeth and growled lowly, trying to intimidate their attackers. But the dinosaurs, having pursued them this far, weren't about to back down. One dinosaur let out a series of calls, summoning its companions guarding the burrow. The mammals were much smaller than the dinosaurs, standing about 30 centimeters tall at the shoulder. Including their extraordinarily long tails, they were roughly the same length as the dinosaurs, about 1.5 meters. Their bodies were covered in dense, short black fur with softer white fur on their bellies. Their paws resembled small human hands, similar to oversized rats. Their round, black eyes radiated fear, clearly marking them as creatures with weak combat abilities. Outnumbered and outsized, the mammals quickly fell to the dinosaurs' coordinated attack, despite their frantic resistance. Luo Wen, witnessing the bullying of the weak, felt compelled to intervene. One dinosaur, busy tearing into its prey, suddenly felt a sharp pain in its neck. When it turned to investigate, it saw nothing. Confused, it endured the pain until it became unbearable, letting out a cry of agony. The other dinosaurs looked at their comrade in confusion. Unable to identify the cause of the distress, they resumed feeding. But soon, another dinosaur cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground and writhing. Their eerie, discordant cries unsettled the remaining dinosaurs. Though they scanned their surroundings, they found nothing amiss. Still, they lowered their heads cautiously, a flicker of fear in their eyes. Even so, another dinosaur succumbed to the same mysterious pain shortly after. The first dinosaur, now paralyzed, had stopped moving entirely, and its cries were fading. This unexplained phenomenon filled the remaining dinosaurs with terror. Reluctant to abandon their prey, they hesitated until one finally fled. The rest soon followed. Luo Wen didn't pursue them. For one, the available food was already more than sufficient. Moreover, he was running low on venom. His venom glands were small, and he had used an extra strong dose on the first dinosaur to ensure a quick kill. Without venom, his combat effectiveness was significantly reduced. Letting the dinosaurs go would keep the meat fresh, and they could always be dealt with later. The scene left 3 dinosaurs' bodies and the 5 mammalian victims, now lifeless after the attack. Despite their rough appearance, they were usable as food. Luo Wen dragged the dinosaur carcasses into the burrow one by one. Their bodies, free from significant wounds or the scent of blood, would remain fresh for a long time. The mammalian bodies, however, reeked of blood and had to be dealt with immediately. Luo Wen carefully salvaged usable meat, wrapped it in fur, and used his Gatling ability to spray the area with a pungent scent. The stench not only masked the smell of blood but also deterred scavengers, making the burrow a safer food storage site. Eating raw meat no longer troubled Luo Wen. In fact, the mammalian meat tasted far better than insect meat. Interestingly, the mammals had a special organ near the base of their tails, where they stored excess fat. This adaptation kept them agile while allowing them to reserve energy. Luo Wen named the fat tail lard, dubbing the creature's tail lard rats. Chapter 109, Encountering the Flying Insects Again, 1. For the next 2 days, Luo Wen stayed in the vicinity. With no food concerns and hopes of finding the nests of the small dinosaurs or flying insects, he scouted the area thoroughly. Unfortunately, their hunting ranges were vast, and Luo Wen failed to encounter them again during this time. Among the new genetic material he acquired, only the tail fat organ stood out. Luo Wen chose not to integrate the other traits into his body. Currently, Luo Wen was already a versatile predator capable of operations on land, sea, air, and underground. His battle-hardened system of stealth and assassination was incredibly effective, and he saw no need to dilute it unless the new abilities were particularly powerful or useful. The tail fat organ, despite its unassuming appearance and amusing name, proved to be immensely practical. It allowed Luo Wen to convert excess energy into compact fat deposits for storage, greatly enhancing his endurance in sustained combat. What would have been a week-long supply of food from the 5 tail lard rats and 3 small dinosaurs had been consumed in just 2 days, with the surplus energy compactly stored. Luo Wen estimated he could now go up to 2 months without eating, provided he rationed the energy. If this ability were distributed to the entire swarm, it could significantly alleviate logistical pressures. With food taken care of, Luo Wen no longer had any reason to remain in the area. He set off once more on his adventurous journey. Every day, Luo Wen remotely checked the situation at the base multiple times. Under his command, everything ran smoothly. The swarm's numbers had surpassed 200,000, and they had quietly taken over the bottom 10 levels of the big-headed ant nest. The 10 Type 3 queen ants were now in cocoons, nearing maturity. In addition, 50 more Type 3 queen ant eggs awaited hatching. The swarm was currently grappling with a severe population shortage, a situation Luo Wen, once a land-dwelling apex predator, found difficult to adjust to. Strengthening the reproductive capabilities of the Type 3 queen ants was the best solution for this issue. Once these Type 3 queen ants matured, the swarm's numbers would explode. Luo Wen was confident that once they overcame this vulnerable period, the swarm would soon dominate the continent again. Over the next 10 days, Luo Wen thoroughly explored the 5-kilometer radius around the base. Combining his observations from the air during previous encounters, he gained a comprehensive understanding of the area. He found himself on the edge of a primeval forest, where the vegetation grew denser and more complex the deeper one ventured. Massive trees blocked out the sunlight, their thick canopies intertwined with vines. Even at midday, the forest floor remained dim and eerie. The forest teemed with a variety of small and medium-sized creatures, forming a tightly interwoven ecosystem. Luo Wen encountered many strange species here, such as a giant patterned spider the size of a millstone. It had spun a massive web between two trees, preying on flying insects, small birds, and bats. He also saw snakes of various sizes and colors. The smaller ones hunted birds and rodents far smaller than the tail-lard rats, while the larger ones preyed on the tail-lard rats themselves. The tail-lard rats, relatively numerous here, occupied the bottom rung of the food chain, subsisting on insects. Luo Wen even saw them ambush scout worker ants from the big-headed ant nest. Something about that seemed off, though Luo Wen couldn't put his finger on it. Smaller creatures were even less picky eaters, their diets determined solely by hunger. Luo Wen discovered a small river and, above its murky surface, spotted super dragonflies with wingspans exceeding 1 meter. However, he refrained from entering the river. The water's opacity hid potential dangers, and as the swarm's supreme leader, Luo Wen couldn't afford unnecessary risks. The local fauna was surprisingly hospitable, generously showcasing their talents and donating genetic material to Luo Wen's collection. He gained abilities like heat detection, echolocation, and web spinning, among others. Additionally, his frequent consumption of birds led to a mutation in his ocular photoreceptors, dramatically enhancing his vision range. While this change wasn't immediately noticeable in the dense forest, Luo Wen realized its impact one night when he climbed above the canopy to enjoy the breeze. From his vantage point, he could directly see the twin moons in the night sky without relying on light detection. One was pale yellow, the other faint white, both exuding a cool, noble glow that left Luo Wen momentarily entranced. Among his discoveries, Luo Wen finally located the nest of the flying insects. Thanks to his newly acquired echolocation system, he detected their flight squadron from afar. His new ability caused hidden ear holes to form on the sides of his head plate. Luo Wen could emit ultrasonic waves at frequencies near 100 kHz and use the echoes to determine the size and position of surrounding objects without relying on sight. Though the small size of his ear holes limited the skill's effectiveness compared to that of a bat, it still significantly enhanced his auditory system. Previously, Luo Wen had to rely on his antennae and leg hairs to sense sound. During his first encounter with the flying insects, Luo Wen had been unprepared. Their speed, combined with the dense forest and poor visibility, caused him to lose track of them. This time, sound alone allowed him to trail them effortlessly. Hanging from a sturdy tree trunk, the giant hive of the flying insects loomed ahead. Its yellow-brown surface, made of unknown materials, stood over 5 meters tall and 2 meters wide. If not for the tree's considerable girth, smaller vegetation wouldn't have been able to support its weight. A circular entrance atop the hive bustled with activity as flying insects darted in and out. Around the hive, numerous guard insects patrolled the air. Luo Wen had no plans to attack the hive, he only needed to capture a single flying insect. However, these creatures always traveled in groups, so careful planning was essential. As a squadron of around 2,000 flying insects arrogantly schemed the forest floor, they remained oblivious to the predator lurking on a nearby tree trunk, waiting for his moment. The main formation passed, leaving one straggler trailing behind. Just as the last flying insect approached, a sharp lance shot out from the tree trunk, piercing it cleanly. The insect emitted a strange sound as it died, alerting the rest of the squadron. Luo Wen quickly stuffed the insect, shell and all, into his mouth, then froze in place, hoping to avoid detection. Unfortunately, his optical camouflage seemed ineffective against the flying insects. Without hesitation, the squadron wheeled around in unison and charged straight at him. Chapter 110, Encountering the Flying Bugs Again, 2. Luo Wen finally understood why the chameleon bug from before had been surrounded and immobilized. It was just like his current situation, encircled by flying bugs, debating whether they had noticed him or if he should make a run for it or stay still. The deliberation didn't last long. The flying bugs launched their attack. Dozens of flying bugs dived at him. As they closed in, their wings spread wide, and their posture instantly shifted. They switched from head-first dives to rear-first thrusts, exposing the stingers at their tails. They were so fast that, despite Luo Wen's reaction, he couldn't completely avoid the attack. Fortunately, his exoskeletal armor wasn't just for show. The tiny stingers couldn't even leave a scratch on his back plates. Luo Wen didn't feel the least bit smug about it. He had seen countless times how the red ants dealt with ultras, and these flying bugs resembled winged ants. Who knew if they might employ similar tactics? Propelling himself with his legs, Luo Wen leaped from the tree and dashed off in a random direction. He didn't choose to fly because his flight speed was far inferior to these bugs designed for aerial maneuvers. Moreover, for him to fly, he would have to expose his wing covers, his back armor, leaving his more vulnerable abdomen exposed. That would be akin to disabling his own defenses. His legs, refined through numerous evolutions, weren't just capable of impressive running but also excellent jumping and clinging abilities. In the obstacle-filled terrain, his movements were like a parkour performance, fluid, efficient, and even visually pleasing. However, to the flying bugs with straight-line flight and high-altitude vision advantages, his acrobatics seemed overly flashy. Oddly enough, Luo Wen had maintained his optical invisibility, yet the flying bugs pursued him with GPS-like precision, always managing to locate and attack him accurately. Luo Wen raised his pincers above and behind his head, shielding his eyes while ensuring his body didn't lean too far forward during his sprint, which could affect his speed. Unfortunately, the slight speed boost was insignificant to the flying bugs. The attacks remained relentless. While most were deflected by his armor, a few bugs managed to latch onto the crevices of his armor and clamber onto his body. Luo Wen couldn't afford to let them linger. Although he was also adept at poisoning, he preferred direct confrontations and despised opponents who used toxins. While running, his legs had to reinforce his back's defense. His reverse-jointed limbs worked to dislodge the flying bugs, significantly impacting his speed. Luo Wen had always thought his 10 limbs, 2 pincers, 2 swimming legs, and 6 standard legs were sufficient to handle most situations. Now, facing one of those rare exceptions, he wished he had 6 more legs to fend off the airborne attacks. At this rate, it was a slow death. In a simple marathon, he could exhaust these bugs behind him, thanks to the energy reserves in his tail lard. But this was an unpredictable primeval jungle, with who knew how many hidden predators lying in wait. He didn't dare drag the flying bugs along for a marathon here, he had to come up with a solution. First, he needed to figure out how they were tracking him. His optical invisibility was useless. He released deceptive pheromones, but they had no effect. He wasn't surprised, as this tracking method only worked at close range, and he had just been testing it. Suddenly, he noticed faint yellow, granular powder on his back armor. The powder seemed to come from the base of the flying bug's hind legs and abdomen, which were covered in fine hairs. Was it pollen? Could they be tracking him using this pollen? Luo Wen's eyes darted around, and sure enough, he spotted traces of the powder on the tip of the leg he had used to attack the first flying bug. Although he didn't know exactly how the bugs tracked the pollen since there were plenty of flowers and pollen around, yet they hadn't lost him. It was likely a unique ability. After determining the cause, Luo Wen's first guess was scent. Mid-run, he abruptly opened his wing covers, lifted his abdomen, and fired off a series of Gatling shots with a pft, pft, pft sound. When the barrage ended, he immediately closed his wing covers. In ground combat, his Gatling method had always worked wonders at close range. But in an aerial ground battle, its limited range became a glaring disadvantage. The flying bugs merely heard the sound and saw the spectacle. Luo Wen hadn't intended to kill them outright, instead, a foul stench accompanied by white smoke enveloped the area. The flying bugs were visibly affected, disoriented, and unable to maintain their course. Yet before Luo Wen could celebrate, they climbed higher and resumed the chase. Damn it, Luo Wen cursed under his breath. The stench only covered a small area, rendering it ineffective while he was on the move. Unless he stayed within the affected zone, it was useless. But staying put wouldn't solve the root problem. If the flying bugs had enough patience, he'd become a sitting duck. The risk was too great, making this strategy untenable. Suddenly, he remembered scenes from cartoons where characters escaped similar predicaments by jumping into water. Not far ahead, Luo Wen could hear the sound of flowing water. Though he wasn't sure if the cartoon logic would work, he had no time to hesitate. The river water was murky and potentially dangerous, but compared to his current known peril, the choice wasn't difficult. Changing course, Luo Wen sprinted toward the river. Every few steps, he fired another volley of shots. Though it only temporarily slowed the flying bugs, it prevented them from latching onto him and allowed him to focus on running faster. Minutes later, just as his ammunition was running low, Luo Wen reached the riverbank. Without hesitation, he leapt and dove into the water. With a loud splash, ripples spread across the surface before calmness returned. Sometimes, cartoon knowledge came in handy. The flying bugs, unable to continue their pursuit, hovered over the water, unwilling to give up. But they had underestimated Luo Wen's versatility as an amphibious soldier. With a sly thought to let them keep waiting, Luo Wen's previously unused swimming legs finally got to shine. Silently, he swam along the riverbank, letting the current carry him. Suddenly, fast-moving unidentified objects darted toward him from underwater. Though the murky river limited visibility, his enhanced hearing picked up on the disturbances. His echolocation, derived from bats, worked even underwater. The dense hairs within his ear cavities provided some waterproofing, allowing it to function to a degree. While he couldn't emit ultrasonic waves underwater, the feedback from water currents revealed unnatural movements. The intense sounds of the rushing water made their approach unmistakable.